Right now, while most people are asleep, something is happening. Not in a metaphorical sense, not as a figure of speech. Literally right now, at this exact moment, while the vast majority of the population is unconscious, systems are running. Algorithms are processing. Interest is compounding. Assets are appreciating. Positions are being calculated. Moves are being planned. And the people those systems belong to, the people who built them, who own them, who profit from them every single second, regardless of whether they are awake or asleep, are thinking differently than you do. Not smarter, not harder, differently. The gap between the wealthiest people on Earth and everyone else is not primarily a gap in intelligence. It is not a gap in effort. It is a gap in the content of thought, in what occupies the mind, in what problems feel worth solving, and what futures feel worth building toward. And tonight I am going to show you exactly what that gap looks like from the inside. Because once you understand what billionaires actually think about, not what they say they think about, in interviews and TED Talks and autobiography chapters written by ghostwriters, but what actually occupies their minds while the rest of the world sleeps, your relationship with your own financial life will never be the same. In 2018, journalist Michael Mechanic spent 3 years embedded with some of the wealthiest people in America, researching his book on the psychology of extreme wealth. What he found disturbed him deeply. Not because the wealthy were villains, not because they were calculating and cruel, but because of how ordinary their concerns were, and yet how completely different the scale and direction of those concerns were from everyone else's. Ordinary people, Mechanic found, think about money in terms of survival, in terms of bills, in terms of what they can afford and what they cannot. The mental bandwidth consumed by financial anxiety, by the gap between income and expenses, by the proximity of crisis, was the dominant feature of ordinary financial consciousness. The wealthy think about money in terms of deployment, in terms of systems, in terms of what their existing capital is producing while they focus their attention elsewhere. The question is never, can I afford this? The question is always, what is this capital doing right now? And is it doing the most valuable thing it can possibly be doing? Two completely different relationships with the same resource. Two completely different mental architectures built around money. And the most disturbing finding was not the difference itself. It was how early the difference begins, how young the mental architecture is established, and how almost impossible it is to reconstruct it later without deliberate, sustained effort. What I'm about to show you are the 7 things billionaires actually think about while you sleep, and why understanding each one is not just intellectually interesting, but practically transformative for anyone trying to close that gap. The first and most fundamental difference in billionaire thinking is the orientation toward systems rather than events. Ordinary financial thinking is event-driven. A paycheck arrives, that is an event. A bill comes due, that is an event. A financial decision needs to be made, that is an event. Each event is processed individually, responded to in the moment, and then the mental file closes until the next event arrives. This is not laziness. It is not a lack of sophistication. It is the natural response to a financial life that operates on a paycheck-to-paycheck or near paycheck-to-paycheck basis. When survival is the context, events are what matter, because events are what threaten or relieve the immediate condition. But billionaires think in systems, not individual events, but the underlying mechanisms that produce events. Not this month's income, but the structure that generates income, whether this month is good or bad. Not this investment's return, but the portfolio architecture that makes individual investment outcomes largely irrelevant to the overall trajectory. Jeff Bezos has said in various interviews that his most important decisions at Amazon were never about individual products or quarters. They were always about what kind of machine was being built, what structural properties the machine would have, and whether those structural properties would produce excellent outcomes over time, even if individual events were unpredictable. This is systems thinking, and it operates at every wealth level, not just at the billionaire level. The person who builds a rental property is not thinking about this month's rent check. They are thinking about a system that produces rent checks whether they work that month or not. The person who builds a business around recurring subscription revenue is not thinking about today's sales. They are thinking about the structural mechanism that produces predictable recurring income regardless of any individual day's performance. The event thinker asks, "How much money did I make this month?" The systems thinker asks, "What mechanism am I building that will make money every month, regardless of what I do?" This is not a question of intelligence. It is a question of orientation, and the orientation can be changed, but it requires a deliberate and sustained effort to stop processing financial life as a series of individual events and start processing it as a series of interconnected systems that can be designed, built, and refined. The second thought that occupies the billionaire mind is one that never appears in ordinary financial consciousness at all. It is the question of what every unit of capital is doing at this exact moment. Not what it earned last year, not what the annual return is, what it is doing right now, tonight, while you are asleep. This is a question that sounds abstract, but has enormously practical implications. When you have money sitting in a savings account earning 0.5% interest while inflation runs at 4%, your capital is not resting. It is losing. Every hour it sits there, it is worth slightly less than the hour before. Capital is never neutral. It is always either growing or shrinking, always either being deployed productively or being silently eroded. The billionaire mind is acutely conscious of this, not in a panicked way, in a structural way. The question of capital deployment is not an emergency question asked in a crisis. It is a background question that runs constantly, a persistent low-level awareness of whether the architecture of the portfolio is optimally deployed, or whether there are opportunities being missed, positions that are suboptimal, capital sitting idle when it could be working. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, has described his investment philosophy as the obsessive pursuit of the question, what is the optimal portfolio given everything I know about the world right now? Not the optimal trade, not the optimal asset, the optimal portfolio, the system, at every moment in time. This constant background awareness of capital deployment has a psychological name in behavioral economics. It is called opportunity cost consciousness, and research consistently shows that it is one of the most significant cognitive differences between high net worth individuals and ordinary investors. The ordinary investor thinks about their investments when the market does something dramatic, when it crashes or surges, when a news headline demands attention. The sophisticated investor thinks about their portfolio's structure constantly, not reacting to events, but continuously evaluating whether the architecture is optimal. The practical implication is significant. Not that you need to obsessively monitor your portfolio, but that the question, what is my capital doing right now, should be a regular, scheduled, structured part of your financial thinking, not an emergency response to external events. The third thought is the one that creates the most profound wealth gap, and that is least discussed in financial education. It is the systematic acquisition and deployment of other people's time. Your time is finite. Regardless of your wealth level, you have 24 hours in a day, approximately 16 waking hours, and a finite number of productive years in your life. The fundamental constraint on any individual's wealth creation through their own effort is the absolute ceiling imposed by the finite number of hours they can personally work. The wealthy solved this problem a long time ago, not by working harder, by building structures that allow them to deploy other people's time, the labor of employees, contractors, partners, systems, and technologies, in ways that generate returns that flow back to the owner of the structure, rather than to the time providers themselves. This is not exploitation in the crude sense. It is the fundamental architecture of wealth creation beyond a certain level. Every business that employs people is a structure for deploying other people's time in ways that generate returns for the business owner. Every investment in a company is a bet on the productive deployment of that company's employees' time, generating returns for shareholders. The billionaire lying awake at 2 in the morning is not thinking about what they will personally accomplish tomorrow. They are thinking about whether their structures are optimally configured to deploy the time of the people within them, whether the incentive systems are aligned, whether the people in the right positions are being utilized at their highest capacity, whether there are bottlenecks that are wasting the valuable time of the structure. Warren Buffett has described his role at Berkshire Hathaway not as running a company, but as allocating capital and talent. Not doing the work himself, but ensuring the right people are doing the right work, and that the structure produces optimal outcomes from the collective effort of thousands of people whose time flows through it. This orientation toward structures that deploy other people's time, rather than toward the personal deployment of your own time, is perhaps the most important cognitive shift that separates people who build serious wealth from people who remain permanently constrained by the ceiling of their own individual capacity. The fourth thought that characterizes billionaire consciousness is the constant scanning for asymmetric opportunity. Ordinary financial thinking evaluates opportunities in roughly linear terms. More work equals more money. Bigger investment equals bigger return. The relationship between input and output is assumed to be roughly proportional. Asymmetric thinking looks for opportunities where the relationship between input and output is dramatically disproportionate, where a small investment of capital or attention produces returns that are orders of magnitude larger than the investment, where the downside is limited and defined, while the upside is theoretically unlimited. Peter Thiel has written about this explicitly. His investment philosophy, articulated in 0 to 1, is built entirely around the search for businesses that don't compete in existing markets, but create new ones, where the competitive dynamics are not linear, but exponential, where being the first and best in a new category produces returns that no incremental improvement in an existing competitive market can come close to matching. This is why billionaires are not primarily interested in optimizing their existing operations. They are constantly scanning the horizon for asymmetric opportunities, for the new category, the emerging technology, the undervalued asset, the structural shift in an industry that others haven't seen yet or haven't acted on yet. The ordinary investor optimizes. The billionaire transforms. The ordinary investor asks, how can I get a slightly better return on what I'm already doing? The billionaire asks, where is the opportunity that looks like nothing today and will look inevitable in 10 years? This is not a question of access to better information. It is a question of mental orientation. The scan for asymmetric opportunity can be performed at any wealth level. The venture capital investor looking for the next exponential business is doing the same cognitive work as the person in a small market looking for the undervalued property in a neighborhood about to change. The scale is different. The orientation is identical. The fifth thought distinguishes the merely wealthy from the dynastically wealthy, and reveals a dimension of financial thinking that most ordinary financial education never addresses at all. It is the architecture of legacy. Not legacy in the sentimental sense of being remembered, Legacy in the structural sense of building financial and institutional architecture that continues to function and compound after the individual is gone. The Rockefeller family is still one of the wealthiest in America, 6 generations after John D. Rockefeller created the original fortune. Not because each generation has been exceptionally talented or hard-working, because the original architecture was designed not for one lifetime, but for perpetual continuation. Trusts, foundations, family offices, diversified holdings across asset classes, deliberate cultivation of financial literacy in each generation. All of these are architectural decisions made with the explicit goal of transcending any individual's lifespan. The Rothschild banking dynasty has operated for over 200 years across 6 generations. The Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Ford, and Walton families have all maintained significant wealth across multiple generations through deliberate architectural decisions about how wealth is structured, governed, and transmitted. While ordinary people think about their financial life in terms of their own lifetime, retirement, estate planning, leaving something for the kids, the billionaire mind operates on a completely different temporal scale. The question is not, how do I provide for my children? The question is, how do I build a structure that provides for my family's financial power across 10 generations? This temporal extension of financial thinking produces completely different decisions. It favors asset classes that appreciate over very long time horizons. It favors institutional structures over personal holdings. It favors financial education within the family as an ongoing investment rather than a one-time event. It favors patience over optimization in ways that short-term thinking never can. And the most important insight from this dimension of billionaire thinking is not that it requires enormous existing wealth to implement. Even at modest levels, the orientation toward building structures that outlast you, toward thinking about financial decisions in terms of decades and generations rather than years and quarters, produces fundamentally different and substantially better financial outcomes. The 6th thought is the most disturbing of all. It is the deliberate, systematic study of the psychology of ordinary people for the purpose of anticipating and exploiting their predictable behavior. The billionaire class, particularly those in finance, consumer goods, media, and technology, has spent enormous resources understanding exactly how ordinary people think about money, make financial decisions, respond to risk, process loss, and experience desire. Not because they are curious about human nature, because that understanding is directly monetizable. We have discussed in previous videos how the banking industry spent billions studying cognitive biases to build financial products that exploit them. How the casino industry mapped human psychology to design environments that override rational decision-making. How advertising weaponized behavioral psychology to create desires that did not previously exist. All of this is the application of the 6th thought, the systematic study of ordinary psychology for profit. The billionaire who owns a consumer credit company is not simply offering a financial service. They are deploying a decades-deep understanding of present bias, loss aversion, denomination effects, and social proof to extract maximum value from millions of people who have no equivalent understanding of their own psychological vulnerabilities. The technology billionaire who built a social media platform is not simply connecting people. They are applying the most sophisticated understanding of variable reward psychology, social comparison mechanisms, and attention economics ever assembled to monetize the psychological vulnerabilities of billions of users simultaneously. The hedge fund billionaire is not simply investing better than ordinary investors. They are systematically studying the predictable panic responses, the overconfidence patterns, and the cognitive biases of retail investors to position themselves on the profitable side of those predictable behaviors. This is what the billionaire is thinking about while you sleep. Not with malice, with the cold pragmatism of someone who has understood that the gap between their financial sophistication and ordinary financial psychology is itself a profit center, and who has built structures to harvest that gap as efficiently as possible. The defense, the only real defense, is the same kind of study in reverse. Understanding your own psychological vulnerabilities, not to exploit them in others, but to protect yourself from being exploited by those who already understand them better than you do. The seventh thought is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all, because it appears to contradict everything financial advice tells ordinary people to do. It is the preservation of optionality at all costs. Ordinary financial advice is built around commitment. Commit to a career. Commit to a mortgage. Commit to a retirement plan. Commit to a diversified portfolio and hold it through the volatility. The underlying message is always, pick something and stay with it. Billionaire thinking operates on a fundamentally different principle. The highest value state is not commitment. It is optionality, the preserved ability to move, to adapt, to exploit opportunities that haven't appeared yet, to exit positions that have deteriorated, to enter positions that suddenly become available. Nassim Taleb has written about this extensively. His concept of the barbell strategy, keeping the majority of capital in extremely safe, liquid positions, while allocating a small portion to highly asymmetric opportunities, is fundamentally a strategy for preserving optionality. The majority of the capital is protected and available for opportunities not yet imagined. A small portion takes the asymmetric bets that could produce transformative returns. Jeff Bezos kept Amazon's balance sheet cash-heavy in ways that his shareholders often criticized as suboptimal, until a crisis or an acquisition opportunity appeared, and suddenly the cash was not suboptimal, but the most valuable thing in the room. The billionaire does not think about what is the best use of this capital right now. They think about what structural position preserves the maximum future flexibility while still generating adequate current returns. This is why the wealthy are not fully invested at all times, why they maintain cash reserves that seem excessive to ordinary financial logic, why they resist committing to single asset classes, single geographies, single industries, not because they are passive or indecisive, because they understand that the world changes in ways that cannot be predicted, and that the entity that survives and prospers in an unpredictable world is not the one with the most optimal position today, but the one with the most flexibility to adapt to whatever tomorrow brings. Optionality is not indecision. It is the most sophisticated financial strategy available, and it is one that requires a fundamentally different orientation toward commitment, certainty, and the future than most ordinary financial thinking produces. You cannot implement all 7 of these thought patterns overnight. Some of them require capital you may not yet have. The architecture of legacy is difficult to build when you are still focused on the architecture of survival. The full deployment of other people's time requires a business structure that takes years to build. But the cognitive shifts, the changes in what problems your mind orients toward, can begin immediately, regardless of your current financial position. You can begin asking, what systems am I building, rather than what events am I responding to? You can begin asking, what is my capital doing right now, and is it doing the most valuable thing it can? You can begin scanning for asymmetric opportunities rather than linear optimizations. You can begin studying your own psychological vulnerabilities, the biases, the automatic responses, the inherited beliefs, with the same seriousness that the people profiting from them have studied them. You can begin thinking about financial decisions in terms of decades rather than quarters. And you can begin preserving optionality, keeping more flexibility, more liquidity, more ability to move, than conventional financial advice typically encourages. None of these cognitive shifts require $1 billion to begin. They require a decision to think differently, which is exactly what this channel is about. Right now, while most people are asleep, the systems keep running. The interest keeps compounding. The assets keep appreciating. The algorithms keep processing. The structures keep deploying capital and time and attention in ways that generate returns for the people who built them. And the people who built them are not sleeping soundly because they are rich. They are rich because they built things that run while they sleep. The gap between where you are and where they are is not primarily a gap in resources. It is a gap in the architecture of thought. In the 7 things this video has just shown you, occupy the minds of people who have closed that gap. The architecture of thought can be rebuilt. It starts with the questions you ask yourself. Subscribe, because every video on this channel is designed to change the questions. And leave a comment. Which of the 7 thoughts most changed how you see your own financial life? Because I guarantee at least one of them landed somewhere uncomfortable. That discomfort is the beginning of something.